That didn't happen. Anyway, I turned off. I put it on do not disturb. Okay, I already did that.
Okay, we're good. Okay. Thank you. Is this being simulcast on YouTube or Facebook, Madan Mohan Prabhu?
Yes, not on Facebook, but on YouTube. I haven't started the broadcast yet, but I will in a second, once we have Bhakti Vijñāna Maharaj joining us.
Ananda Leela, do you need anything from us for the simulcast?
Just the link.
The YouTube link?
Yes.
I will send it. I will send it.
Yeah, send it to Ananda Leela, please.
Sure.
And then we're all set. Thanks for having us come on for the warm-up, Madan Mohan. This helps.
Yeah, it does help. We have learned the hard way.
Yeah. And when I'm not speaking, my microphone will be on mute.
Right, and I will also turn on to the interpretation channel. We have a special dedicated interpretation channel for the Russian-speaking audience, so you won't hear a word from me. I have logged in through a different account, and if need be, I will chime in through that account separately, because otherwise, if I turn the interpretation channel off and on, it will disrupt the devotees' listening experience.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to comb my hair and get ready.
Me too. Yes, Bhakti Vijñāna Maharaj will be with us in a few minutes.
Okay, back in a second.
Let's see. Uh-oh. What's that? Why am I getting that sound? Why am I getting that?
Is it do not disturb lit?
No, but I turned off. I'm just gonna quit WhatsApp. There.
Yeah. I'll work with you later on a more efficient way.
Okay, it's 8 o'clock. We have to start now. Is Bhakti Vijñāna here?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, Bhakti Vijñāna Goswami, Hare Krishna.
I just entered. Hare Krishna. Very nice to see all of you. My
Good to see
faces,
you.
all of you. So, are we ready to start, Mahanji?
Yes, Maharaj, you can start.
Hare Krishna. So I will be introducing you. I don't know if you need my introduction or not, but nevertheless, I will do it. I'm very happy to introduce to everyone His Holiness Hridayananda Das Goswami and His Grace Bhakti Tirtha Prabhu.
Oh, Brahmatirtha.
Brahmatirtha, sorry. Sorry. So I don't know if I need to say much more. Brahmatirtha Prabhu is famous for being a hero of perfect questions, perfect answers. In his home in Gainesville, I saw the whole bookshelf with different translations of this book. He is known to every one of you as Bob Cohen. And of course, Hridayananda Maharaj is a very dear disciple of Srila Prabhupada, who spent a lot of time with him, who pioneered preaching in South America and developed this yatra very wonderfully. He's a great scholar. He has PhD from Harvard University, and he was a professor in different universities, and he's a writer. And you all probably read his books, like translation of the Adi Parva of Mahabharata and maybe Bhagavad Gita also. I love both of them very dearly. Hridayananda Maharaj is also my hero. I really I remember how he was playing Handel to me. I was visiting him. And there is a little request. Maybe before starting your talk or your presentation on the topic, you could speak a few words about Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu, because today is the 10th anniversary of his departure. And because you were serving and working closely with him, especially on the 10th, 11th, and 12th cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, maybe you can speak a few words about him. I think it would be greatly appreciated by all the devotees. But otherwise, please do your presentation, and I'm very excited to hear it as well.
Thank you.
I hope it's not too early in California.
No, it's late. It's already 8 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Bhakti Vijñāna Goswami. It's very kind of you to introduce us in that way. Gopi Paranadhana, of course, was instrumental, essential in our service of completing Prabhupada's Bhagavatam. He was very much a Brahman in the classic sense. Of course, as we know, Prabhupada, in his effort to reestablish an authentic Brahminical order in the world, he offered initiation very mercifully and generously to so many people in so many places. And but he was offering opportunity. He was offering this chance. And of course, as we know, in the Vedic culture, even Kshatriyas and Vaishyas also may get the sacred thread. But Gopi Paranadhana was truly a Brahman by character. He was very intelligent. He was an excellent scholar and Sanskritist. When we began the Bhagavatam project, he knew Sanskrit much better than I did. And then of course, I had to catch up. And he was a person detached from material enjoyment. He spent the last many years of his life in the Vrindavan area, absorbed in Krishna, absorbed in his service. And so he was one of the true learned Brahmins, actually. And Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane, a Brahmin who is endowed, Sampanne, with Vidya, knowledge, and Vinaya, and humility, or submission to higher authorities. And I think that was very much Gopi Pranadhana. So perhaps now we'll begin the, so Brahma Tirtha, were you going to ask me questions? Or?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you questions. And the topic for this is looking at ISKCON's history and in a philosophical way. So the first question is, we'd like you to discuss Prabhupada as an especially empowered successor in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. And more specifically, we have a Sampradaya with great personalities in it. And we'd like to look at Prabhupada's unique contributions as part of that Sampradaya. We know, for example, that Tamal Krishna Maharaj looked at his theological contributions in his dissertation, and from any angle you prefer to look at it.
Well, first I will state the obvious, that Prabhupada was a pure devotee of Krishna in the highest sense of the word. The word pure devotee can have different meanings. Prabhupada sometimes used it to indicate a devotee who had fully devoted themselves to the mission, in the sense that they were not actively working for sense gratification, for economic development, or so on, that a person had really devoted their life to the mission. And of course, in the early days of the movement, many people, perhaps most of the devotees who were, as we would say, living in temples, as we said back then, were in that category. So, but there's another sense of pure devotee, a more exalted sense, which applies only to rare souls like Prabhupada, persons who are completely Krishna conscious. Prabhupada once told me personally that there was never a time when he did not know Krishna. So Prabhupada is also one of the great Acharyas, and his contribution is unique in terms of bringing Krishna to the whole world. You can see each of the great modern Acharyas, let's say starting with Bhakti Thakur, and then his son Bhakti Siddhanta Gaur-Kishore, of course, is a great Paramahansa devotee, but he served in a different way. But in terms of the great Acharyas who taught the world directly, you have Bhakti Vinod Thakur, who was the first modern Acharya, in the sense that scholars, historians would use the word modern. He's the first modern Acharya, someone who is educated, highly educated, both in the Western system and the traditional Vaishnava system, and who was very, very keen, very anxious to bring Krishna consciousness to the world, especially to the leading countries, which obviously was strategically necessary. And then his son Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, just as Bhakti Vinod is the first modern Acharya, Bhakti Siddhanta creates the first, I think we could call it modern institutional movement. Because if you look at Bhakti Vinod Thakur, he certainly organized his mission, but there were no temples, there were no sannyasis, there were no brahmacharis. And it was sort of along the model of 19th century cultural associations, if you know the history of those things. And Bhakti Siddhanta created a real mission where you have missionaries going out here and there. And so Bhakti Siddhanta, in a sense, establishes the first, you could say, complete religious institution in Gaudiya Vaishnava history. And then you have Prabhupada, who is really the first world Acharya. The first world Acharya. And all of these Acharyas, including Bhakti Vinod, are building on what came before. And so I see it as this like sort of Acharya super team, where each one, Bhakti Vinod Thakur lays a type of modern foundation, then Bhakti Siddhanta develops it into a real religious mission in the modern sense. And then Prabhupada takes it to the whole world. So we have three great Acharyas, each making a unique contribution, yet each one building on what the previous Acharya has done, and each one very conscious of their debt to the previous great souls. And another thing about Prabhupada, which I think needs to be remembered. I think there are various important features of Prabhupada which need to be remembered. One is that Prabhupada was the consummate pragmatist. He wanted to get the job done. Prabhupada showed a brilliant and determined understanding of one of the most important distinctions found in our tradition, a distinction made explicitly by Rupa Goswami in chapter 6 of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which is the distinction between basic principles and details. The principle between basic details and basic detail. Okay, I'll bring my mind back here to the program. I don't know what planet I was just on. The distinction between basic principles and details. So he gives a list. Rupa Goswami gives a list in the Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list. It's not that he includes every possible detail, but he does give enough to show us very clearly what he's talking about. So Prabhupada was a consummate pragmatist, and he would just find a way to get the job done without giving up our basic principles. Prabhupada had this amazing combination of being absolutely uncompromising on especially basic principles of philosophy, where if someone ever made the big mistake of saying to Prabhupada, so in your opinion, Prabhupada would immediately correct them. It is not my opinion, this is the fact. So he spoke with this complete realization and the complete conviction that comes from complete realization. So when in questions of Siddhanta or fundamental philosophy, in issues of ultimately who is Krishna and what is the purpose of life, Prabhupada was absolutely uncompromising. and boldly, courageously, fearlessly uncompromising. And yet in practical details, he was very flexible. And for example, when Tamal Krishna Goswami went to China, and he was probably the only disciple of Prabhupada that could have done what he did in China, and he had to shave off his sikha, he wore the clothes of a Western businessman, he did all kinds of things. What was Prabhupada's response? Prabhupada was thrilled. Prabhupada was ecstatic to see what he had done. Prabhupada, I mean, to me, you look at Prabhupada's statement in the Bhagavatam, purport to verse 4:8:54, where Prabhupada says, people who think that in the West, speaking of course about external things, that in the West, you can do everything the way it's done in India in terms of the details of devotional service. Prabhupada said they are puffed up with concocted notions. The idea that everything externally has to be the same as in India, Prabhupada said, is a concocted notion based on someone's being puffed up. So I think one more point I'll make is I think we have to recognize ISKCON is, of course, the only movement existing today that can really save the world. And I consider myself to be a faithful member of ISKCON. At the same time, to me, being a faithful member of ISKCON means sometimes being capable of self-criticism. Any society which is incapable of criticizing itself, or which feels that any criticism is offensive or shouldn't be done, and I think is a society or an institution which is going to have serious problems, very serious problems. So I've noted, just as a historian, something which is an irrefutable fact, and that is that because of our conditioning, not Prabhupada, but because of our conditioning, there is a phenomenon among the followers of Prabhupada to filter their understanding of him, so that certain things that Prabhupada said are filtered out, and certain things he maybe didn't even say have become very prominent aspects of ISKCON. And so I think our duty is to give one example. Prabhupada said many times, and I've actually collected many of these quotes, I'm sure not all of them, but many of them. He said many times, and he said very emphatically, that to practice Krishna consciousness seriously does not mean that externally one has to do everything in the Indian way. You can look at Prabhupada's conversation with Allen Ginsberg, in which Prabhupada is very strong on this point, including things like dress, cuisine. I mean, you know, we can't change the principles of not eating meat, fish, and eggs and so on, but in terms of how you prepare food for Krishna, in terms of how you dress, in terms of many things, Prabhupada kept insisting that it's absurd to think that in the West, everything will be done as in India, and the movement will be successful. Prabhupada says in his purport to 4:8:54, this is a concoction coming from people who are puffed up with their own invented notions. And so I won't go into all that now, but I think that if we don't understand Prabhupada's pragmatic approach, this combination of being absolutely fixed on our basic philosophy, and yet in terms of practical details being very flexible, if we don't understand this, then of course, first of all, we are not perfectly representing Prabhupada, and we are also crippling the Hare Krishna movement. We are not using all the tools, all the instruments that Prabhupada gave us. And another So Prabhupada, to me, I mean, we can talk and we should talk about the glories of Prabhupada. That's part of, let's say, the practice of Bhakti Yoga includes, as Krishna himself teaches, includes glorifying Acharya Upasanam. Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita, one must worship the Acharya, one should glorify the Acharya, and this is also mentioned in the Bhagavatam, of course. In fact, it is said in the last Samsara prayer, Dhyayangs to, no, the second to last, sorry, number 7, Sakshad Hari Tvena, Sakshad Hari Tvena, with the position of Hari himself, of Hari personally, Sakshad Hari Tvena, Samasta Shastra Ruktas. This is stated in all the Shastras, Samasta Shastra Ruktas. Tata, and similarly, Bhavyate Eva Sadbi. And it is understood in this way. It is considered in this way by saintly persons. So Prabhupada, of course, philosophically, Prabhupada, you could say, repeated, always in a different way, always in a unique way. But Prabhupada repeated the same basic philosophical points hundreds, perhaps thousands of times. And so in my view, he created an immovable philosophical object. If you look at the history of religions, the biggest problem has been theological deviation. As you know, God only knows what Jesus actually taught. And even if you look at Buddha, if you look at the rise of Mahayana Buddhism, which completely went in a different direction from the historical Buddha. Of course, they would probably argue about that, but I think it's still true. And so Prabhupada presented the philosophy in a way that you just can't change it, although some people try. I mean, some people try, even, you know, claiming to be devotees or claiming to be whatever, sannyasis, they try to change Prabhupada's philosophy. But so apart from our basic philosophy that Krishna is God and we have to, you know, and all the basic principles that we're eternal souls, we have to serve Krishna through the parampara system and so on. And so apart from the basic philosophy, which Prabhupada just repeated so many times so that only a great fool could misunderstand it, and there are such great fools who are now on YouTube claiming to be devotees. But in any case, as far as practical details, it's really important that we have a vigorous, honest discussion among devotees of what Prabhupada really taught and to what extent we are filtering some of his instructions, to what extent we are presenting, let's say, a Prabhupada who is sort of fashioned in our own image. So that if I'm a very conservative devotee, I present to the world a very conservative Prabhupada. Or if I'm a very liberal devotee, I present to the world a completely liberal Prabhupada. So understanding Prabhupada perfectly is not so easy. And it doesn't involve, anyway, sometimes devotees just find some quote. Prabhupada at one point said this, but then he said something else. And so you have to, what about Prabhupada hermeneutics? Some people think that Prabhupada speaks infallibly, even on material subjects. Prabhupada himself said that this was ludicrous. Ludicrous in English means comically absurd. Prabhupada gave the example, if you think because I'm your guru, that therefore I am expert on, let's say, medical matters, I can give professional medical advice. He said that's ludicrous. I've written a paper on this. So when does Prabhupada speak? If you just take the word opinion, which I've done, if you study how Prabhupada uses that one word, opinion, and there's actually two sets of quotes. One set of quotes is, "This is not my opinion. I never gave you my opinion. When did I ever give you my opinion?" If someone was at a class, let's say a non-devotee said, Swamiji, in your opinion, he would immediately said, "It is not my opinion. It is not a question of opinion. It is the fact." So that's one set of statements from Prabhupada. But there's another set of statements from Prabhupada using the same word, opinion, in a very different way. There's another set of many statements from Prabhupada where he says, well, this is just my opinion. In my opinion, this is, and there's these two statements. I never gave my opinion. When did I ever give my opinion? And another set of statements in which Prabhupada said, well, this is my opinion. This is just my opinion. And so this is not a contradiction. It's a paradox. A paradox is a superficial contradiction, but can be resolved by higher understanding. So every time that Prabhupada says, I never gave my opinion, he is quoting from Shastra. And he says very explicitly that the Guru speaks infallibly when he is quoting Shastra. The other set of statements where Prabhupada says, this is my opinion, this is just my opinion. In every case, he's talking about some material subject. He's talking about a material subject. Now, if you say that, no, all of Prabhupada's statements are perfect, then you're not paying attention to what Prabhupada is saying. So what I say is that logically, and I'm using the word in a technical philosophical sense, logically, you cannot claim that everything Prabhupada said is true. Because if you say that everything Prabhupada said is true, then you don't accept that when Prabhupada says, I make mistakes about material things, not about spiritual things. If you say, well, Prabhupada is just being humble, but that's not really true, then you don't accept that everything Prabhupada said is true. So because Prabhupada says, and he says it many times, that of course I make mistakes on material things, and this is just my opinion. If you say that everything Prabhupada said is true, you are contradicting yourself. So I think that's one of the challenges for the Hare Krishna movement, and that is to glorify Prabhupada fully as he deserves, to honor Prabhupada completely as the founder Acharya of ISKCON, as a unique servant of Krishna, to see ourselves sincerely as servants of the servant of Prabhupada, and at the same time, to take Prabhupada seriously when he explains his own limitations, and to follow Prabhupada's instructions to make Krishna consciousness practical and attractive to people all around the world, especially in the Western countries, for obvious historical reasons. So, yes.
I just as a follow-up question, when driving down the road, we can go off a ditch in the left side or the right side. So one ditch is to overstate Prabhupada and say everything he said, even on material things in which he said he's not perfect, is perfect. So that's one side. Is there another side in which Prabhupada is minimized?
Oh, yes. Excellent question. There are a group of people now claiming to be Vaishnavas, claiming to be Gaudiya Vaishnavas, even claiming to be sannyasis. Fortunately, most of them, almost all of them, are not in ISKCON, thank God, but who use various techniques such as, well, Prabhupada said this, but he just said that for preaching. He didn't really mean it. So basically, anything that Prabhupada said that you don't agree with, you can just cancel it out by saying that, well, Prabhupada said it, but that's not really what he meant. To give an example, and they do this even to the point of rejecting the Bhagavad Gita in the name of rasa. For example, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Samohang sarva bhuteshu, I am equal to all living beings. Krishna says, Pandita samadarshana, the word sama. As you know, the word Sindhu became the word Hindu by the S changing to H. You've probably all heard this. So by that same historical phonetic change, the word samo became homo, which is used in so many words, such as homogeneous, homosexual, and so on, which means the same. So that's the Sanskrit word samo. Anyway, Krishna says about his devotees, samak sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhakting labate parang, that a devotee achieves the highest bhakti only if that devotee is equal to everyone. Krishna says, je jatamam prapadyante, that as everyone approaches me, tangs tataiva bhajamiham, I reciprocate with them exactly in that way. So again and again, in many other verses, Krishna says, nadate kasichit papam naiva sukritam, people, that I do not take responsibility for anyone's sinful or pious activities. They are responsible. And so there are people now who reject Krishna's statements in the Bhagavad Gita, reject Prabhupada's statements, and say that Krishna can just gives his mercy to anyone whimsically for no reason. For no reason. It's not reciprocation. It's just, the divine whimsy of the Lord. Or that, for example, we were never with Krishna. Prabhupada put as the title of his magazine, Back to Godhead. I don't know how to say that in Russian, but back to
Обратно
God.
к Богу, Махарадж.
What's that?
Обратно к Богу.
Yes. And so Krishna, the only place in the Bhagavatam, Jiva Goswami in his Tattva Sandarbha, which is his book on epistemology. How do you know something? How do you know? How can you say this is opinion, this is knowledge? How do you know that you know, and so on? So he explains this in Tattva Sandarbha. And the very title of the book is very interesting, because Tattva, as I explained in an essay I just wrote, Tattva is the older Sanskrit word used for what now is, let's say, in since Lord Chaitanya's time, perhaps earlier, it's more common to find the word Siddhanta in the sense of a fundamental philosophical truth. And in the Bhagavad, in the earlier Sanskrit, they use the word Tattva, which means a categorical truth, such as Vishnu Tattva, Jiva Tattva, Prakriti Tattva, Vadanti Tattva Vidang, Tattvam Yad Jnanavadvayam, and so on. In the famous verse in the Gita, where it's translated, approach a spiritual master, 434, Krishna says, Tadvidhi pranipaten, and so on, pariprasnena sevya, upadekshanti te jnanam jnanas tattva darshina. The word that we translate seers of the truth is actually tattva darshina, the seers of tattva, the seers of this categorical truth. So the point I was going to make here about deviation is that the only place in the Bhagavatam where Krishna talks about directly how the soul comes to the material world, the only place in the Bhagavatam that Krishna directly speaks about this is 4th canto, chapter, I think 28, verses 53 and 55. Where Krishna twice says to the soul, you rejected me. You rejected me and came to this world. So the verbs that Krishna uses, and of course some of the, and Prabhupada taught this, back to home, back to Godhead. And so there are people who think they're sophisticated who reject this idea. And we were never with Krishna. And when the Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunai, they completely mistranslate this. I mean, literally, they translate it completely the opposite of what it says. What it says is that Krishna Prema, love for Krishna, is eternally present there. And it simply has to be revived. It has to be awakened. Anyway, so Prabhupada taught this, and there are people going way back. I mean, Bhakti Vijñāna, you must remember the leaves don't fall nonsense. And so rejecting Prabhupada's teaching that we have to go back to Krishna. We are all originally, in Prabhupada's first record, we are all originally Krishna conscious entities, but somehow we've forgotten. So Krishna twice says, he says mang vihaya and mang hitwa, which are actually the same verse, one time with the prefix v, which you can look it up in the dictionary. Krishna says, you rejected me, you left me, you abandoned me. He says it twice, and you came to this world. Rejecting me, you came to this world. So that's another example where people deviate. So there's all these things. I mean, Prabhupada taught we have to go back to home, back to Godhead. We're all originally Krishna conscious entities. And some people claiming to be Vaishnavas, of course, argue against this, try to invoke Jiva Goswami on their side, which is nonsense because they don't really understand Jiva Goswami. Also, in terms of, there's that point, there's the point of saying that not only Prabhupada said things just to, for the moment for preaching, which is of course nonsense when it comes to philosophy. They say that Prabhupada taught that we come from Krishna to attract Western people. But as we know, that's the one point of our philosophy, which is probably most difficult for modern people. It's probably the most difficult point for modern people. And therefore, to say Prabhupada taught that as a preaching strategy is nonsense in many ways. Rejecting the Bhagavad Gita, because some people want to try to force a particular definition of causeless mercy, a definition of causeless mercy which contradicts many verses of the Bhagavad Gita. I can't hear you, Brahmatirtha.
Can you expand upon that for a moment?
Yes, I think this is a very important point, and a point which is, I think, the misunderstanding of it has crippled our preaching efforts in many countries. I'm not talking about Russia. I don't have knowledge of Russia, but the countries I do know about. And that is that, first of all, the term causeless mercy, which is used very commonly in ISKCON, is not found in Shastra. It's not found in Shastra. That does not mean that it doesn't exist, but it's a hermeneutic principle. In other words, a rational principle for understanding a sacred tradition or text, that if Prabhupada says something which is not literally, explicitly found in Shastra, then we have to understand what Prabhupada is saying, not reject it. But we have to understand what Prabhupada is saying in a way that is consistent with Shastra. That's a hermeneutic principle. Prabhupada himself says that many times Prabhupada says, and other Acharyas say, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. And of the three, Prabhupada says, the central authority is Shastra. Prabhupada does not say that Shastra is bona fide if it agrees with the Acharya. Prabhupada always says that an Acharya is bona fide if he agrees with Shastra. So the reference point is Shastra. And in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, Krishna says in the last verse of chapter 17, 1728. Ashadhaya hutam tattam tapas taptam kritam cha jat asariti uchate partha nachatat pretya noiha. Any activity, any religious activity which someone does not perform with real faith, really believing in it, Krishna says it is said to be asat, unreal, insignificant, in this life and the next. Nata cha pretya noiha. In this life and in the next life, it won't do very much. Now, how do you reconcile that with the Gyata Sukriti? So these are philosophical issues. I mean, devotees are supposed to be intelligent and philosophical. So the way I reconcile it, both philosophically and in a way that explains real history, the real history of ISKCON, is that I go to chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita, which I think actually explains what a Gyata Sukriti is. And which I'll quote for you here. And then I want to talk about the case of Ajamila. I think this is very important because I think this is crucial to actually making the Hare Krishna movement work around the world. In chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna begins a topic, and a very important topic. Arjuna brings up a very important topic in verse 637, where he says, Ayati shatayopeto yoga chalitamanasa. What about the case of someone that falls down from their spiritual practice? And the word Arjuna uses is ayati. Yati is a word in Sanskrit which means a spiritual practitioner. A spiritual practitioner. You can either be formed from the verse yat or from the verb yam, which means from the verb yat, it means one who's endeavoring, one who's practicing spiritual life. And from the verbal root yam, it would mean one who is controlling themselves. So anyway, yati, one who fell down, yati is like Yati Maharaj, one who fell down from spiritual practice, but shadhaya upeta, but really has faith. They really believe in Krishna. They really believe in spiritual life. They just lost control of themselves. And they fell down from their practice. Yogat, from yoga, chalita manasa, their mind was deviated. Aprapya yoga samsiddhing, not achieving the perfection of yoga. Kangating Krishna gachati. Oh Krishna, that person, to what destination does that person go? What happens to that person? And then Arjuna says, are they just, ruined? They lost everything. And he says, this is my doubt. So Krishna answers him in that famous verse, Aparta naiveha namutra vinash. Not in this life, not in the next life will that person actually be ruined. But because someone that does good is never overcome by evil, as I think it's translated in the BBT edition. So what happens to the person? Krishna says that, they go, the prapya punya kritang lokan, they achieve the worlds of pious persons, and they ushitwa saswati sama, they live there for just almost forever. It's not forever, but for a very long time. And then suchinang simatang gihi yoga prasto vijayate. And the person comes down and takes birth in a very pious or wealthy family. So, but then Krishna talks about, or they take birth in a family of spiritual people. So then, now I get to the verses that really explain, I think, what a Gyata Sukriti, at least one thing it means that is consistent with our Shastras. Krishna says, Tatra, in that next life, Tang Buddhi Sang Yogam Lavate Purvadehikam, the person regains a connection with spiritual understanding. This is a very literal translation. The person regains their connection with spiritual understanding, but that spiritual understanding is purva dehikam. It came from their previous body. In other words, Krishna is not talking here about a Gyata Sukriti. It is a Gyata Sukriti in the sense that the person is not aware of their previous body. Then Krishna says, Purvabhya sena tenaiva hriyateva shopisa. Many of you, I'm sure, had the experience of coming into contact with Krishna consciousness, and you just kind of were carried away. It's like, oh my God, I have to do this. I can't believe it, but I'm joining the Hare Krishna movement. And, there goes my family and there go my friends. And so that specific experience of literally, Krishna uses the word hriyate, which means sort of carried away. Avasha, beyond your control. You just like, I have to do this. I have to chant Hare Krishna. I have to practice Bhakti Yoga. You're just sort of carried into it, swept away, and you can't really stop yourself. That experience, Krishna says, is Purvabhya sentenaiva. It is because of your past practice in a previous life. And Krishna says it is because of that alone. There is no other reason for it.
Go on.
I just want to complete this quickly.
Yes.
So take the case of a Jamila. I'm going to give two kinds of evidence that are given to show, no, it's just completely a Gyata Sukriti. Krishna is basically not doing what he says he does in Bhagavad Gita. He is breaking his own promise in Bhagavad Gita, which he gives many times, that he is not reciprocating with people. He is not giving people what they deserve. He's just whimsically, by divine whim, choosing, okay, I'll bless you, even though you don't deserve it. And someone else who is just as good as you are is going to hell, which would make Krishna a terrible spiritual parent, by the way. So Krishna, take the case of a Jamila. A Jamila, in his youth, was a very serious spiritual practitioner. A very serious spiritual. He, by his own devotion, he reached a certain level of bhakti. Then he fell down. And so when the Vishnu Dutas saved him, it is not an example of a Gyata Sukriti, or it is. I mean, technically it is, because he didn't remember his previous practice. So it was a Gyata, unknown to him. But it's an example of what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, neha vikramanashosti, which means that, I'll tell you what verse that is. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's verse 240, chapter 2, text 40, where Krishna says, in this dharma, in this practice of Krishna consciousness, there is no loss and there is no diminution. Nehabi. So a Jamila reached a certain stage by his own endeavor, and then he was brought back to that stage. What about all the verses in the Bhagavad Gita? I'm sorry, the Bhagavatam where it said that, for example, in the first chapter of the Bhagavatam, Jannama bibasho grananta taksadyo vimucheta. Even if someone is chanting the holy name, let's say Vivasha, sort of unconsciously or whatever, they can be immediately liberated. But in all the verses that say that one can be liberated just by chanting, the verb in each one of those verses, it does not say the person is liberated. It said he may be liberated or she may be liberated. It's possible. And of course, what determines the possibility in Bhagavad Gita is that there's a spiritual background. So therefore, the idea that, let's say you go out and you chant Hare Krishna in the street, and some people happen to be walking by, and some people are not walking by. To say there's no reason for that, it's just causeless, it's just, It's just not our philosophy. It is simply not the philosophy found in Shastra. Krishna says, Jejata mam prabhadyante. I reciprocate. Now, this tendency to be what I call sort of like hyper pious, like too pious, like, no, Krishna can do anything he wants. I mean, of course, Krishna can do whatever he wants, but Krishna chooses to be reasonable. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, he comes to this world to reestablish justice. The word dharma in Sanskrit does not mean here an institutional religion. It means justice. Krishna comes to establish justice. And in Mahabharata, the Kurus they were acting against justice, against the law. And Krishna came and reestablished justice.
I want to use that as a segue to get into some of the points that we've been asked to discuss. I asked you to explain the idea of Grata Sukriti, and then moving on. Going back to the topic at hand of the history of ISKCON, how was Prabhupada, what made Prabhupada so successful? One of the points, that was one of the questions we've been asked to look at. One of the points you've been making, and I think it's really done very important, very well, is that Prabhupada made philosophical sense. And in my own experience, Prabhupada would take complex subject matters such as Achinta Beta Beta Tattva and simply bring it down to, you take an iron rod, you put it in fire. Is it iron or is it fire? It's simultaneously one and different. And he would just give such simple examples of complex philosophical thoughts. So what are some of the things that you see, some of the factors that made Prabhupada so successful in presenting to an audience that was so different?
Well, what you said, I think you said it very well. Prabhupada had a genius, just as you said it, for taking complex philosophy and explaining it very simply. And by the way, many of the examples, like the one you gave, are really Prabhupada was taking from Shastra.
Yeah.
But yes, he was brilliant. He when I get these by, I guess, SSPT or whatever it is, they send these little emails out every day, and I always listen. They always have, they say nectar drop. It's from Prabhupada, and it just astonishes me how Prabhupada has such absolute integrity. He's really fearless. He just states the truth very simply, very clearly, and cuts through just an ocean of sophistry and word jugglery, and because of his own powerful realization. I can tell one story that I was with Prabhupada in 1972 in New Vrindavan, and a reporter came from the New York Times. I mean, one of the most famous newspapers in the world. And anyway, I won't tell you what I think of the New York Times. So, but it was a young reporter. He was interviewing Prabhupada for the New York Times, and Prabhupada, I mean, in the mind of this reporter, I'm a reporter, you are someone claiming to be a spiritual leader, I'm going to interview you. But I could see very clearly, I was sitting next to Prabhupada, and I could see very clearly that Prabhupada was a pure soul with no identification with his external body. And he was seeing the reporter as an eternal servant of Krishna, as an eternal soul who had fallen. Oh, Russian. So Prabhupada, he was just I could see that he was just speaking to that reporter as a soul, and he was saying things like, why don't you surrender to Krishna? And Prabhupada just sort of took away all of his material designations, all his material coverings, and was just speaking to him as a soul. And I could see the reporter, Prabhupada was just so powerful. And so we are conditioned souls. We have, these external bodies, and we are trying to become Krishna conscious. We're trying to serve. Whereas Prabhupada was coming from a very different platform. I remember when I used to see Prabhupada, he didn't look like a human being. I mean, he was, of course, obviously anatomically, he had a human body, obviously. But Prabhupada's soul, his spiritual purity was so powerful that to see Prabhupada in the right consciousness was a self-realization experience, because we could actually see that this is a pure soul who's just engaging an external body in order to communicate with us. So, so Krishna sent to us a pure soul who is his pure devotee. And Prabhupada really is the Acharya, because you can see by his own behavior, by just the way he lived his life, how to be a pure devotee. But the challenge, if I could say one more point, I think the challenge to us is to understand Prabhupada. And it is a challenge. It's not obvious that we understand Prabhupada. I mean, yeah, there are certain things we obviously do understand Prabhupada. I mean, at least for us, we understand that Prabhupada created a movement. We understand that Prabhupada wanted us to serve within his movement. Some people don't understand that, unfortunately, but anyone with common sense understands that Prabhupada wanted us to serve his ISKCON. We know what Prabhupada, the basic philosophy he taught, because he explained it, as Brahmatirtha said, so clearly and so often. And so we do know a lot about Prabhupada. It's not that we know nothing. But I think that at this point, if we're going to make this movement successful, that's one thing I should mention about Prabhupada, because one of the topics was like, what was it like when Prabhupada was here? When Prabhupada was here, for those who were, how should I put it, leading devotees, or for those who really were directly working with Prabhupada, spreading this movement was everything. And of course, you had to be a good devotee yourself. You had to treat other people, other devotees nicely. If you didn't, Prabhupada would become very displeased if you didn't treat other devotees nicely, and so on. But everything was about spreading this movement. And so Prabhupada, well, for example, there was recently a film called Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, exclamation point. And that film, basically made the same argument that all Hare Krishna films make. And that is that, Prabhupada came, he had no money, he was alone, the movement grew so quickly, it spread all around the world. And therefore, this is proof of Prabhupada's potency, it's proof of his purity and the validity, the power of his message, which is bona fide. Now, at the same time, I think if someday devotees could make a film that was a bit more thoughtful and not just a sort of a promotional film, because here's some questions that should be addressed. And I want to make clear that I know that Prabhupada is a great Acharya and a pure devotee. I'm not questioning that. But these are questions, if we are intellectually honest, that should be addressed. Prabhupada came in 1965. He really started ISKCON in 1966. At that time, many gurus who were not bona fide, many gurus who were actually cheating, became greatly successful. So the same Prabhupada, the same pure devotee, and he is a pure devotee, he is a Mahabhagavata, he is a liberated soul, but that same liberated soul in India, in Jhansi, in Delhi, was not really successful. You know, he did something, but not really successful. So if you take external success as proof of purity, then did Prabhupada become a pure devotee on the Jaladuta? Obviously not. Obviously, Prabhupada was a pure devotee actually when he was born. I mean, he was born as a pure devotee. So, but if you give that argument, then it cuts both ways. What about the fact that so many impure persons became very, very successful? Or, for example, if you take Prabhupada's success, you know, we've all seen the movies so many times that Prabhupada came to the West and, you know, created this big movement. What about now? What about the fact that now in the Western world and in many places, the movement is not very successful? You know, Russia is a different world. Ukraine is a different world, but even Russia and Ukraine, you know, there are problems like everywhere in this world. But what does that prove? What does Prabhupada used to say, the churches are empty and our temples are full, therefore we are bona fide. Well, what about today when the churches are full and the temples are empty? At least in terms of Western devotees or Western people coming. So again, my conclusion is not that ISKCON is not bona fide or Prabhupada is not a great devotee. I'm just saying there's a need for intelligence. There's a need for intelligence to think, you know, what are we doing? What should we be doing? Are we really understanding Prabhupada completely? Have we looked carefully at everything Prabhupada said?
That takes us to the next question in a perfect path. We have this point that you're making, that success, to say that somebody came to the West and was making a lot of followers, for example. There were others such as the Guru Maharaj Ji, or even from Korea, Reverend Moon, others were very successful. So the criteria of success goes just beyond, there was a time when a lot of followers came. And that's a very important point. And that takes us to Prabhupada's books. Prabhupada's, one of his main legacy, most important legacy to Prabhupada, were his books, what they would do. How do you see Prabhupada's books as a conduit to Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta?
Well, Prabhupada's books are the most powerful. And because Prabhupada was specifically empowered to bring Krishna to the whole world. And of course, there are other great Acharyas who are also, you know, pure devotees. But when I hear or read Prabhupada's books, there is, you know, Prabhupada himself talks about the linguistic problem, that this is not my first language. And language also means culture. As we know, there are some controversial statements in Prabhupada's books. None of these are about basic philosophy. They're all about material subjects. But at the end of the day, as they say, at least in English, Prabhupada's books are most powerful. I mean, I write books which we are seeing Western people can very easily understand, and they like the books. And so I see myself as simply trying to build a bridge to Prabhupada, because there is a spiritual power in Prabhupada's books that none of us can imitate. And you know, Prabhupada, he wrote a letter to me. Prabhupada wrote a letter to me. It's in Vedabase, where Prabhupada said, read my books and then explain them in your own words. explain them in your own words. So my words are the words of sort of a Western rational approach. That's just, you know, my latest incarnation. So I see that my job in following that instruction, and Prabhupada also in Prabhupada's first instruction to me.
My apologies, Hridayananda Maharaj.
Yes.
My internet connection acted up and I missed about 1 minute of your presentation, the last minute. Would you mind rewinding your last 2 statements or so? I'm sorry for that.
That's all right.
And because I lost internet connection, the devotees lost the interpretation.
Okay.
While we're interrupting, I just wanted to ask Madan Mohan Prabhu, how long does the program go? And I want to make sure we're leaving enough time for questions and answers.
Well, usually our programs go for about 1.5 to 2 hours, and we leave the last 30 minutes for questions, which I'm sure will be many this time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Just want to make sure I have it right.
Thank you, Madan Mohan. I will repeat that. Of course, it will cost you more, but that's an extra charge. That's a joke. I'm joking. So, what was I saying, Brahmatirtha?
Oh, you were talking about
Prabhupada's books.
Prabhupada's books and
the place where I lost you, Maharaj, was when you started speaking about Srila Prabhupada's books as being extremely empowered.
Yes, Prabhupada. I mean, obviously, I don't have the same level of realization as Prabhupada, obviously. Well, it's obvious to some people. So, Prabhupada's books have spiritual power that none of us can imitate. At the same time, Prabhupada wrote me a letter and said, read my books and explain them in your own words. Also, I was very fortunate, just like the first instruction Prabhupada received from his spiritual master became his life mission. I also, as a small servant of Prabhupada, had that same experience. Prabhupada's first direct instruction to me became my life mission. And that was to stay in the university, to get a good education, and then to present Krishna consciousness to other educated people. So if I put these two instructions together that I received from Prabhupada, get a good education, present Krishna to educated people, and read my books and explain them in your own words, that's what I'm doing now. Right now, in my view, I am carrying out Prabhupada's instructions to me. I am trying to present Krishna consciousness in a rational way. And Prabhupada said, religion without philosophy is sentimentalism or fanaticism. And frankly, I think we have too much of that in the Vaishnava community. Sentimentalism and fanaticism. I'm not saying everyone is sentimental and fanatical. I'm just saying, I think we need to be very careful about that. So rational does not mean atheist. It does not mean materialist. It means that you are devoted to Prabhupada and Krishna, but you have a rational understanding and you present things to other people in a logical way, which is based in history, which is based on knowing what Shastra actually says. I had an experience, for example, a few years ago. I was in, some country, and another ISKCON guru and sannyasi happened to be visiting that same area. Neither of us were from that area. And so he came to visit me where I was staying, and he was giving an argument against sort of my approach to Western preaching. And he claimed that he said it's right there in the Bhagavatam. And he gave a word, pratibimba. Bimba in Sanskrit, this is used philosophically. Bimba means an image. And pratibimba means a counter image. In other words, a reflection. That's one of the ways you say reflection, a counter image, pratibimba. And he said the Bhagavatam says that India, external, with its external culture and everything, is just a reflection of the spiritual world. And I said, I don't think the Bhagavatam says that. So I looked it up, and of course, he was wrong. I mean, the Bhagavatam doesn't say anything like that, nothing like that. And yet here's a person who travels around the world and, preaches to so many people, so many innocent devotees sit at his feet. And he's, I'm sure saying many things that are true and many things that are, importantly true about Krishna, but also saying things that are wrong, that are just misrepresenting Shastra. And so I think it's, I had another experience actually in that same city where another well-known ISKCON sannyasi came to see me, and we had lunch. And somehow or other, these things always happen at lunch. Anyway, so he said to me, the reason that Krishna West is a bad idea is because he actually, I swear to God, he said this to me. He said to me, and he's a well-known, preacher, has big position in ISKCON. He said to me that if you wear a dhoti, you clean it every day. But if you wear, let's say, blue jeans, I mean, I never wear blue jeans, but if you wear pants, then you never clean them. And I was thinking, what? If you wear pants, you never clean them. And I was thinking, what if you clean your pants? But anyway, so, I mean, there's so many things. There's so many things. Has anyone, for example, actually looked at the Bhagavatam to see everything the Bhagavatam says about how Vaishnavas should dress? I did that. I actually looked in the Bhagavatam to see all the Sanskrit verses that talk about how to dress. And if you do that, you get a very, very different picture than you get in most places in ISKCON.
So I wanted to take that as an opportunity to focus on a question that comes to a lot of devotees' minds. And that is, you were here, as I was, when Prabhupada was here. And how are things, looking at the history of ISKCON during Prabhupada's times, how do you contrast it with what you see now? What the Russians really want to hear from you is, what was your experience being associated with Prabhupada? Tell us about the history of ISKCON then, and then some contrast and compare.
Okay. First of all, even if you're a devotee, even if you're a pure devotee, there are certain laws of nature, such as gravity, such as, principles of health and disease. And so to be a pure devotee, if a pure devotee mercifully comes to this world and agrees to serve Krishna within an external body, a material body, which of course, as we know, is spiritualized, but still. So what I mean to say is that the fact that even devotees are under the laws of nature, not karma. See, I think this is a very common misunderstanding, and it relates to what you asked. And that is, Rupa Goswami says in the beginning of the Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that someone who really surrenders to Krishna, becomes a serious practicing devotee, is freed from karma. To be freed from karma does not mean to be free from the laws of nature. Those are two very different things. So, for example, if a karmi, a jnani, a yogi, and a devotee all fall off a building, they fall at exactly the same speed according to the laws of nature. So the point here is that there are not only physical laws that affect our bodies, there are sociological principles. And ISKCON, as a society in the material world, is very much subject to sociological principles. And so whether it's, for example, principles of oligarchy, Prabhupada ordered, and I think very wisely, that ISKCON be managed by the GBC. The GBC, in terms of political science, is an oligarchy. It's an oligarchy. And oligarchies have certain advantages and they have certain problems. And we find that those advantages and those problems both manifest in ISKCON leadership. And so we can study that and we can improve leadership. Or for example, there's the principle of charismatic leadership. Prabhupada was a charismatic leader. And by that, I don't mean like Elvis Presley, charismatic. I'm using it in the academic sense from the Greek word charisma. The Greek word charisma means very much what we call in Sanskrit Shakti-avesha. That someone has received special power from the Lord. And that's how we understood Prabhupada. So anyway, Max Weber, the German sociologist that almost invented the field of sociology of religion, there are certain sociological principles that we can observe. For example, when Prabhupada was here, typically a charismatic leader being perceived as a representative of God, and of course, Prabhupada really is a representative of God, but because someone is understood to be a representative of God, therefore the followers accept that person as having all authority. So for example, when we were young, we used to sell books, and if it said, you cannot sell anything here, those laws were for non-devotees because we were following a higher law. We were following a spiritual law. And so that idea that the material laws are not for us, or for example, also the idea that the material laws of nutrition don't apply to us. I mean, Prabhupada disciples as a group, I think we can say, are not famous for being very healthy. And so that idea that I can just eat, Mahaprasadam, I don't have to get exercise because, it's spiritual. Well, yes, but you're also going to spiritually die young. And so in all these ways, so sociologically speaking, typically a charismatic leader, because the followers see all authority in that person, then when that person passes on, leaves this world, what happens to that person's movement? So I think that this idea that Prabhupada knows everything about everything, even though he always said he didn't. And so, what should you do if you're sick? Well, what did Prabhupada say? What should you do about that? See what Prabhupada said. How should we do this? And so the problem is that Prabhupada was consciously making practical adjustments for the age he lived in. It is now 50 years later. The world is completely different. The world's completely different. So Prabhupada, I think to some extent we have lost Prabhupada's agility. We have lost as a movement Prabhupada's ability to adapt, to respond to changing times. I think we've lost that to some extent. I mean, obviously not completely. So Prabhupada came at a time when Indian spirituality was gigantic. It was like a huge thing. Prabhupada came at a time when to be a freak, I don't know how you say freak in Russian, but you probably say freak or something like that.
Chudak.
What?
Chudak.
Chudak, yes. Jai Chudak. It was, that was the, so the Hare Krishnas, because we look so strange, that was a very positive thing. That showed that we weren't just capitalists. We weren't just, like mindless middle class Americans, because we were freaky, we were Chudak. So But those times are over. And so if ISKCON in the Western world, especially, again, I don't claim to be an expert about Russia, but in the Western world, to some extent, the Hare Krishna movement is preaching to a world that doesn't exist anymore. A world that has not existed for 40 years.
Look, go on. But I have another follow-up question on that when you're ready.
Yeah. So just one last sentence. So even though Prabhupada, I mean, there's a Sanskrit phrase which appears twice in the Bhagavatam, Desha Kala Vibhagavit. So maybe we should take the trash out. I'm in a hotel, so Desha means place, Kala means time, Vibhaga, the differences, Vit, knowing, Desha. And so Desha Kala Vibhaga Vit is used to glorify Bhishma in the first canto, and in the fourth canto, Desha Kala Vibhaga Vit, Narada Muni instructs Dhruva Maharaj that in serving Krishna, he must be Desha Kala Vibhaga Vit. And if you look at Prabhupada's purports for both these verses, the first canto and fourth canto, he emphasizes very, very, very strongly that you have to make relevant adjustments. So to some extent, I think many places in ISKCON have become frozen in time. And whether you are a religious movement or a very large prehistoric mammal, if you can't adapt to your environment, you will become extinct.
Yeah, I might say my limited experience working with the Russians is through the Bhaktivedanta Institute. And I've been extremely impressed. We had, I think, 4 or 5 Russians come to our conference a few years ago, and we sent one of our lead scientists to Russia several times. And their ability to look at the big picture is very impressive to me. Now, my last question before we get into group questions is this very difficult one, which we ought to all be struggling with. Prabhupada gave us 2 paradoxical instructions, and they're very clearly presented. Don't change anything, and time, place, and circumstance. And he gave us both. And we see this in many areas of ISKCON. How do we balance these 2 competing trends in a deep philosophical way? And I'll add one more comment. A former major preacher in Russia, I once asked, what's the most dangerous thing for the movement? And he said to me, without even thinking, Prabhupada says. Because when we just throw quotes, we're losing the philosophical context which Prabhupada gave us. So my question is, how in a philosophical context do we balance these 2 very competing paradoxical instructions from Prabhupada?
Thank you. Very simple, very, very simple. There are 2 categories of instructions. One category is things you cannot change. There are basically 3 things that we cannot change. There are 3 things that Prabhupada taught us that we cannot change. And that is number 1, our philosophy. You can't change our philosophy, as some people try to do. You can't change our philosophy. Number 2, our basic spiritual practice, sadhana bhakti. Prabhupada gave us a way to practice Krishna consciousness. We can't change that. And number 3, Prabhupada gave us a spiritual institution. And he asked us, he begged us to work within that institution, ISKCON. So those are the 3 things I personally never changed: spiritual practice, philosophy, and Prabhupada's institution. Those are the things you can't change. Now, as far as, how do you dress and what kind of food do you cook? I mean, those things we adjust. And if you don't adapt, you will become like a you know, like the word that's always used, you know, we will become a dinosaur. The dinosaur is the example of a creature that was very big and powerful, but was unable to adjust.
Very good. At this point, we're at the time where it was suggested by our wonderful Russian host that we ought to open up to the many questions from the Russian audience. I'm not sure how the host will handle that, so I'll turn this back to our host.
Thank you so much, Brahmatirtha Prabhu. The way we would like to have questions asked is by having them typed out in chat, because if we ask devotees to raise their hands, it will take more time to translate back to you. It will also confuse our English-speaking audience. So I will make that announcement in Russian, and we'll have hopefully some questions in chat, which I'll translate for you. Is it okay?
Yeah, great idea.
Well,
first of all, before we move to the question and answer session, I would like to ask Bhakti Vijñāna Maharaj if he has any recap on what Hidananda Maharaj has so eloquently presented in the last 1.5 hours. Bhakti Vijñāna Maharaj, are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Would like to have some concluding words on Maharaj's part of his presentation before we move into the questions and answer session.
Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation. I humbly disagree on some points of it, in particular about the points of address. I understand your rationale behind this. And I kind of agree that maybe the time of the freaks is over and people are more conservative. And the strange sort of address is an impediment for people to relate to the philosophy. And in this way, it can be counterproductive. That's obvious. But at the same time, I do think that the dress has a utility, specific dress has a utility to maintain the identity. We're living in a very aggressive environment, and while living in this aggressive environment, it's important to maintain the identity not only by the means of philosophy and internal spiritual practice, which is of course the main thing, but it's also helpful to have the external identification. And of course, I do know that it is an impediment for many people, but at the same time, in my humble opinion, for more philosophical people who are not so much into externals, that's not such a big impediment. They can distinguish the reality from, the external things. So I do think personally that for our self-identification and for our for maintaining this self-identity as a movement, it's important. And, as you perfectly know, the very word devotee is coming from the root to wash or to cleanse. So it's easier, nevertheless, to wash the simple piece of clothes than blue jeans. So, I don't agree that you never wash the blue jeans, but still, it's easier to wash dhoti than the blue jeans. But that's not so important in this sense. I think in the sociological sense, there is a good reason to maintain the traditional dress, so to speak, traditional Vaishnava dress.
Thank you. If I could just respond for a minute.
Sure.
Yeah, of course, I appreciate what you said. I would say I don't want to refute what you said, but I think it has to be placed in perspective. And that is that there are devotees, I know there are, who feel more Krishna conscious and strong, when they wear Indian clothes. And because the word devotional dress is not a term in our philosophy, so it's, for me, they're Indian clothes. So, but there are many other devotees who feel the opposite. So I think it's when you say things like it maintains an identity, we're dealing there not with eternal spiritual principles, but with human psychology, or you could say also with human sociology. And my experience is that there are some devotees who feel more Krishna conscious in Indian clothes, but there are many, many devotees, I know because they communicate with me, who actually feel much more Krishna conscious when they don't dress like that, and when they wear Western clothes. And I know that it's true because I'm one of them. I came to a point in my life where it's much easier for me to just be Krishna conscious and relate to other people and preach without that. And so it's very different for different people. And so when we give a psycho-sociological argument that we should wear these clothes because of the effects, then it's an argument which is true for some people, but not true for other people. I found that I could preach much better, and I was much more comfortable as a devotee in public, not wearing Indian clothes.
Now, I'm asking the question from somewhat different perspective. My perspective is not how I feel or how somebody else feels. That I completely can relate what you're saying. I'm speaking, we have different religious groups, and you usually identify these religious groups, especially the clergy, from a dress.
And not in the West, not in the West.
Well,
but that's actually a point that I wanted to make. We can actually, scholars study all the time. It's very common. They study what religions are growing, what religions are not growing. So in America and in Western Europe, there's no question, the religions that are growing the most and are having, the most solidarity don't use those kinds of exotic uniforms. And so this is something, the idea that it's better for our public identity, we know that's not true from social science. Also, I will agree with you though. I do agree with you that having some kind of mark or dress that identifies you as a religious or spiritual person or leader is very good. But if you look at the way that's done in the Western world, for example, a Christian minister or priest may have a little cross, which to me, or a collar, which to me is very analogous to our neck beads. And so there are different cultural languages at the present time in the Western world, and even in places in the world that are influenced by Western culture. It is certainly acceptable, and even you could say advantageous, to somehow indicate to the public that you are a religious person. However, it is done subtly. It is done very modestly. It's not done by, for example, Catholic priests, they never wear their full, robes and everything in public. They just don't do that. They do that in the church for the service. And the Protestants, actually, in America, for every person that joins the Roman Catholic Church, 6 people leave. And the Roman Catholic Church in America is becoming a third world religion. It used to be in America, just to give one example, the Catholic Center of America.
Excuse me, Maharaj, I missed that point about 6 people leaving every second. Could you please repeat again? I couldn't catch it.
For every one person that joins the Roman Catholic Church in America, 6 people leave. And of course, there are different reasons for this, but even among the Catholics or among the Protestants or among the rabbis or among all these people, they do often indicate in some way that they're clergy, but not with their full ceremonial dress, not with dress which is very different than what everyone else is wearing. So there's a cultural language, there's a way to identify yourself as a Vaishnava in the Western world, which does not present yourself in such an exotic way that, that it just doesn't fit in the culture. And there is not a single religion, there's not a single religious movement in the Western world that I know of that wears exotic dress and is growing. And all the religions that are growing, I mean, it seems funny for us to give that sociological argument when the Hare Krishna movement in the West is not doing that well. And other religions that have much more, let's say, preaching spirit, much more solidarity, they're much more attractive to Western people, and they don't use that kind of dress. So again, I'm not speaking for Russia, but I think we have to look at the facts, and devotees, it's not just theoretical. We have to look at real social science, what's actually happening.
I'm going to summarize what was said so we can move on to another question.
But I agree with, I agree with Bhakti Vijñāna. I mean, I agree with you, and I think you're a wonderful devotee, and and there are situations and there are people for whom I think what you say is correct. I simply,
you were talking about the principles, and Srila Rupa Goswami, he specifically says that in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he's not going to speak about the details, he's speaking about the principles. And one of the principles which he mentions in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is Vaishnava Chinha, which is the external identification as a Vaishnava, including tilak and,
No, but actually Vaishnava Chinna, first of all, the word Chinna does not refer to dress. The word Chinna can refer to neck beads. Neck beads are very much Vaishnava Chinna. And also,
and tilak.
No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. Rupa Goswami says, Jena Kena Prakarena, which Prabhupada used to quote all the time. Jena Kena Prakarena Mano Krishna Nivesha. Somehow or other, the mind should be fixed in Krishna. So if you in India, everyone wears their calling card on their forehead. If you're a Shaiva or a Vaishnava, or they put the red dye. And so Rupa Goswami is saying that you should identify yourself as a Vaishnava. That's all the word means. It does not necessarily mean tilak. It does not necessarily mean dressing a certain way. It simply means that you should publicly make it clear that you're a Vaishnava. And so I think neck beads are a way to do that, which is completely consistent with and appropriate in the Western world anyway.
So let me bring this back to Russia. I think what we're saying, and both of you would agree, that dress may be a detail, not a principle.
It is a detail. It is.
Well, appearing as a Vaishnav is a principle, as Rupa Goswami has enunciated. The detail is how I appear as a Vaishnava. Might it be tilak?
I'm not sure that Rupa Goswami. I mean, I have to talk privately to Bhakti Vijñāna. I have to see exactly where he says that.
Sorry, Maharaj, I have to translate all that crosstalk, so please bear that in mind.
Okay, I'll go slowly. If you look at Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami says many things that we do not follow. that Prabhupada did not follow because they're details. And so therefore, if we take a particular principle, let's say Vaishnava Chinna, C-I-H-N-A, it just means like a visible mark or something, or a mark of something. We have to look at it in context. Is Rupa Goswami giving that as a basic principle or not? And what did Prabhupada say? And does Shastra say it? Because again, Rupa Goswami is both giving us knowledge, which is eternal, but also addressing a particular world that he lived in. And so therefore, I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of injunctions in the Bhagavatam and the Acharyas that we don't follow, that Prabhupada didn't follow.
Well, to take it back, Vaishnav dress, let us say, the actual details of dress may be a detail. And I had a conversation I'll share with Vaisheshika Prabhu, and he dresses in a dhoti, and he looks very good in it, and it's very presentable, and he looks like somebody you'd want to meet, and he's the most famous book distributor in ISKCON probably. So I asked Vaisheshika, do you wear a dhoti wherever you go? He says, well, not to China or places like that where I can't, but I do. And then he said to me, and I look good in a dhoti. And some people can always wear a dhoti. Then he said to me, very important words for me personally, some people should never wear a dhoti. And I realized I always look like I got out of bed on the wrong side of the bed when I put on a dhoti. So he was saying to me, it's a practical matter of what works and what doesn't work. I might add something. I just was reading in Giriraj Swami's wonderful book on the Juhu project. And in it, he tells a story that I don't remember hearing before that really amazed me. The devotees came from America. This is in the early 70s. They're in Bombay. And I was there for some of this. I saw it happening. They're doing Harinam on the street. This is what we do. It's Lord Chaitanya's movement. We've come from America. We're doing Lord Chaitanya's movement. And the people on the street in Bombay were throwing coins at the devotees, paisa coins. And this was given to Prabhupada's attention through a newspaper article. And Prabhupada sent a note, immediately stop the Harinam. This is in Lord Chaitanya's land. Stop it. Why did he say stop it? He said, because they're seeing us as beggars in India, and it's hurting our mission, not helping. So he actually stopped Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement in Bombay when it didn't work. So it's a matter of, and I think this is what Bhakti Vijñāna Swami was saying, it's a matter of what's practical. Certainly when in the 70s and the 80s, wearing a dhoti gave us a sense of identity. It gave us a sense of who we were. People were very curious about us. It helped us gain respect in certain ways. The question Hridayananda Maharaj is raising, does that happen in all places through all times? Is what worked in the 70s or 80s applicable in, let's say, Gainesville, Florida in 2021, where I am? And what Bhakti Vijñāna Swami is saying, in Russia, where we have certain obstacles, does wearing a dhoti help or not help? I certainly could not answer that question, because Bhakti Vijñāna Swami will have to answer it for what's most practical for Russia. So that's my summary of understanding what's going on here.
But also, I would say in Russia, I mean, I think Bhakti Vijñāna Goswami is a wonderful devotee. And
Just a second, Hridayananda Maharaj, I have to finish up translating Bhakti Tirtha's.
Sorry.
Brahma Tirtha Prabhu, I'm sorry.
He doesn't look like Bhakti Tirtha, does he?
No, I'm sorry. Misspoke. Yes, Maharaj. Thank you so much.
Yes, I mean, Bhakti Vijñāna Goswami, I see as an advanced Krishna conscious person. I find his association very relishable, and I think he's very dear to Krishna. I would say that even in Russia, I'm quite sure that in Russia, some Russian devotees feel exactly as Bhakti Vijñāna Goswami said, and there are other Russian devotees who feel differently. And so my point is not that everyone has to think like me, which obviously is never going to happen. Rather, if someone says, if a devotee says, I feel more Krishna conscious when I wear Indian clothes, and I find it helps my interaction with the public, then I accept that. I respect that. I think the mistake is saying everybody has to do that. And if you actually want to make a good impression on the public, you have to wear Indian clothes. If you want to be strong in Krishna consciousness, you have to wear Indian clothes. That's obviously not true. And there are thousands and thousands of devotees, including many in Russia, who would say it's not true in their lives, in their personal lives. I had for example, when Tamal Krishna Goswami went back to college because of my propaganda, I personally could have convinced him to go back to college. And he wore these amazing silk sannyas dhotis, and he was like, you know, everyone loved him. The professors loved him. He was a star. When I went back to college, I found that if I wore Indian clothes, Krishna really punished me. I won't go into all the details, but Krishna made it clear to me in a way that I can never forget. That's not what you're supposed to do. That's not your path. And so there are different kinds of devotees. Some devotees feel very comfortable. I personally find it very uncomfortable, especially now that I'm older, to get that kind of attention. If I go out in the public and I'm wearing Indian clothes and everyone's looking at me, I personally feel extremely uncomfortable in that situation. That's just me. And what I find is that and I've always felt that way. I felt that way before I joined the movement. In 1969, in the summer, I was in Los Angeles where I lived. I mean, I was there for the summer. I went to school in Berkeley, and I saw a Harinam party. And I knew the devotees from Berkeley a little bit. So I decided to chant with them. And, you know, there was Vijñāna was there and Tamal Krishna, they were brahmacharis and different devotees. So I was chanting, and I thought to myself, should I go and stand with the devotees, or should I stay here with, you know, all the ordinary people and just chant? In my mind, I thought it's better I stay here, because then the people will see that a normal person is chanting Hare Krishna. I didn't even know what ISKCON was. I didn't know the philosophy. I'll give you another example from Harvard. When I went to Harvard, I found out very quickly that the Hare Krishna movement in the Harvard Department of Sanskrit and Indian Studies, that the Hare Krishna movement was a big joke, literally. I mean, they just would joke about it. They would laugh at it because devotees would come into Harvard Square, you know, right by the campus, and they would run around and jump and dance and play the drums. And it was a big joke. It was a big joke. I went there as a devotee. Everyone knew I was a devotee. I had neck beads. I didn't have tilak. I didn't wear tilak. I had neck beads. I had a bead bag. And I didn't hide the fact that I was a Hare Krishna, but I went in a different dress. What was the result? The same people who were laughing at the devotees began to ask me about Krishna. Please explain your philosophy. Please explain ISKCON. They wanted to know about it. Twice, I had an entire Harvard department come to my house for prasadam and to learn about the Hare Krishna movement. An entire department, all the graduate students, all the professors, and these were the same people who were just laughing at the Hare Krishna movement. So my personal experience, both in preaching And I get letters every day from people that say, thank God you have started this Krishna West, because now I'm comfortable, I feel peaceful, and I can preach. And we are, for example, there are many places there are cities in the world where there's a traditional Hare Krishna temple and there's a, evil, horrible Krishna West center. And the Krishna West Center, not everywhere, but in places where we have good leaders, they're making many more devotees. They're bringing many more souls to Krishna consciousness. So again, everyone has the right to choose what works for them. I'm not arguing about that. Everyone has a right to be comfortable in bhakti yoga. Everyone has a right to present Krishna consciousness in a way that is authentic for them. But it's not an absolute principle. It's not a universal principle. There are thousands and thousands of devotees who have exactly the opposite experience. They feel more Krishna conscious and are more effective in their preaching when they
somebody is asking the question that's relevant. They're saying, why did Prabhupada introduce Indian dress?
And we do have a lot of questions.
Yeah. Okay.
We have little time left.
Yeah, okay, there's a quote from Prabhupada, which you'll find in Vedabase, where a devotee asked that question, and Prabhupada said, I didn't say you had to do this. You wanted to do it. Okay. And by the way, the one statement where Prabhupada says, when the devotees wear dhotis, they look like they're coming from Vaikuntha, that's one of the statements where Prabhupada says, but that's just my opinion. If you look at the whole quote. Prabhupada personally told me. Prabhupada personally
Sorry, Maharaj, could you just pause for a second? I have to catch up.
Oh, sorry.
We'll have to go a little slower.
No, it's just that sometimes when the discussion gets
of course.
animated, and I want to catch every single word.
Of course.
Unless you don't want me to.
Ready again?
No, Maharaj, I'll signal you just a second.
Okay.
Yes, Maharaj.
Let me just say a second. Okay. Yeah, just 1 second. This gets back to the same point. Who is the real Prabhupada? In my view, there are some devotees who are conservative by nature, which is fine. That's, half of humanity. But they've kind of created a Prabhupada in their own image. Prabhupada personally told me in Honolulu, you do not have to wear Indian clothes. He said that to me. He said it to many other people. So again, there's a saying in English, don't try to be more Catholic than the Pope. And so I want the full Prabhupada in the center of ISKCON, not just the conservative Prabhupada, but also the very liberal Prabhupada, because that's also Prabhupada. And so Bhakti Vijñāna he's an excellent devotee. He's very Krishna conscious. I'm sure he will go back to Godhead, and he has found a way that it works for him. He's obviously a very good devotee, and he's a very good, intelligent devotee, and he's found a way to be Krishna conscious. And I found a different way to be Krishna conscious. But we are both faithfully serving Prabhupada, and we both have people who agree with us.
I think, Bhakti Vijñāna Swami, do you want to make any other comment before we move on to questions? And Hridaya Maharaj, I put the translation of a question in the chat.
Just to read, this is Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Eastern part of it, 2nd chapter, which is Sadhana Bhakti, verse 122. Translation, wearing the marks of Vaishnava, verse 84, shown in Padma Purana. Those Vaishnavas who have Tulasi beads, lotus seed beads, and japa beads around their necks, who have their shoulders marked with signs of Konchi and Chakra, who have tilak on their foreheads quickly purify the earth. Just, you know, I don't think we need any discussion on this. It's just for the reference.
Yes. No, but just one point. First of all, that's chapter 2. And that means that Rupa Goswami
Sadhana Bhakti.
does not include these points as a basic principle.
Maharaj, may I humbly suggest, because we have such a backlog of questions.
Okay, sorry.
About literally begging to be answered.
Yeah, there are more important questions.
I really want.
Go ahead. I surrender.
I want to use your time wisely.
Yes, I surrender.
And also, it's getting late here in this part of the world if we are talking about cultural and geographical sensibilities. And devotees do want to have their questions at least asked, if not answered. Please forgive me, Maharaj, for interjecting.
No. You're right. Go ahead, please.
There will be pause, Maharaj, for you because I will turn off my mic and I'll go through the questions and explain to the devotees.
You want me to read the Russian or the English? Just kidding.
Have you learned Russian enough to read the Russian questions?
No, I'm joking.
Okay. Using Google Translate. Just a second, Maharaj. I will go through the questions because I didn't have a chance to go through them. And if you could kindly let me be excused for a few seconds.
Да, попробую. Да, спасибо, Харе Кришна.
Yes, the first question is from Pavana Prabhu. He's one of our leaders. Actually, all of the devotees who have joined here, they're mostly temple presidents, regional secretaries, traveling preachers, sannyasis, and heads of different departments. So I don't have to introduce each and every one of them by saying that he or she is a leader. It's granted. So Pavana Prabhu asks a question. Pavana Prabhu was
Я подумал, что меня попросили уточнить и добавил вторую часть, но она не нужна. Там выше первая часть, там все есть.
Okay, here's a question. I heard from disciples of Srila Prabhupada that he mentioned the verse Yasyadave Parabhaksir Yadhadave Tadha Gurau as the main verse in all the Vedas. In this verse, it is said that by having unswerving or undeviated service to Guru and Krishna, a devotee has all the purports of Vedic literatures revealed to him or her. Tasyati Katite Hyarta. What is being spoken about here by the import or the meaning of all the Shastras? Is it an intuitive understanding of some basic principles of philosophy or something else, like logic and details also get revealed to him or her? Could you please elucidate, elaborate on this point?
Well, the essence of all the Vedas is to surrender to Krishna. And that's the ultimate conclusion of all Shastra, that one should surrender to Krishna and become Krishna's devotee. So, Jasya Deve Para Bhaktir, one who has great devotion or the highest devotion for Deva, for God, Yatha Deve, and as much for God, Tata Guru, that much also for the Guru, Krishna's loving representative. Tasyaite, so to that person, Katita, Hyarta, Prakash, all the purposes. The word artha here is key, because what is revealed to such a person who has great devotion for Guru and Krishna, what is revealed is the artha, the ultimate meanings, the purpose of the Vedas. And of course, In the Bhagavad Gita, most of the time that Krishna mentions the Veda, he does it somewhat negatively. Trigunya Vishaya Veda, Nis Trigunya Bhavarjuna. He says, Arjuna, the Vedas, especially the 4 Vedas, they deal with material subject matters. You have to transcend that. Krishna talks about the Veda Vada Rata. Those who are simply trying to enjoy the words of the Vedas without understanding the purpose. That's in chapter 2. In chapter 9, Krishna talks about Trigunya, Trividyam, Mang Soma Putapapa, that those who simply study the 3 Vedas, the Rig, Yajur, and Atharva Veda, and go up to material heaven and come down. So most of the time when Krishna mentions the Vedas, he explains how people misunderstand the ultimate purpose. So this verse says that the ultimate purpose, the real meaning of the Vedas, which is Vedais cha sarvair ahameva Vedya. By all the Vedas, I am to be known. So there can be no other ultimate meaning or purpose of the Veda than to know Krishna. And so that's what is taught to a person who has great devotion for Krishna and the Guru.
Thank you, Maharaj. Next question. Ishana Prabhu is asking question. Do I understand correctly that all questions besides basic foundational points of our philosophy, every devotee in our movement can decide for him or herself how to behave, how to dress, etc.? If this is so, how can we maintain the unity or cohesion of our movement and avoid or avert, if you will, chaos and lack of scruples and avoid cheap populism?
Very good question. Excellent question. First of all, you can't do anything. There are limits.
Maharaj, I'll have to repeat this question in Russian.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Вопрос Ишаны Прабhu. Правильно ли я понимаю, что Yes, Maharaj.
Yes, Krishna does give in the Bhagavad Gita cultural standards. Those cultural standards are that we should act in the mode of goodness. So there's a difference between a cultural principle and an ethnic detail. I think those two things are very commonly confused in the Hare Krishna movement. For example, a cultural principle is that when you go to a house of God, Deva Griha, when you go to a house of God, a temple or whatever, you have to dress in a way that's very respectful. You have to show respect because you're going to a house of God. So, I mean, I cannot tell you how many times devotees said, well, if we don't wear dhotis, does it mean I just wear like some kind of like cut off blue jeans into the temple, or women wear bikinis, or, you know, it shows an inability to distinguish between cultural principles and ethnic details. Wearing Indian clothes is an ethnic detail. Going to a house of God dressed very respectfully and showing and honoring that place, that is a cultural principle. Or, for example, music. Personally, again, this is a confession. Now you will know how degraded I really am. But I simply don't have much of a taste for Indian music, including kartals. I am much more absorbed in the Western, actually Baroque. If you know Baroque, Bach and Handel. And I mean, I'm very much, that's my music, the Baroque tradition. And so when I do kirtan and I, play this sort of beautiful sort of neo-Baroque type music on the keyboard, I play the keyboard, then it inspires me. I can do kirtan all day. I can do kirtan for hours. And when I play Indian musical instruments, I don't have much of an attention span. So again, people are different, but the music I play, kirtan, is very much in the mode of goodness. In fact, I think sometimes it's much more in the mode of goodness. I don't just like, bang, bang, and make something, a lot of very loud, which I can't do that. So it's very much in the mode of goodness. My mind is really absorbed in Krishna, and it's very Krishna conscious, and other people also. So again, people are different. So the standard, for example, food. Food should be in the mode of goodness. Now, a lot of the Mahaprasadam and food prasadam devotees eat, according to Bhagavad Gita, is not in the mode of goodness. It's in the mode of passion. Because Krishna specifically says in the Gita, food which is very spicy, which is not so healthy, is in the mode of passion or ignorance. That food in the mode of goodness is healthy and it makes you peaceful. It's not just, a bunch of chili on everything. And a lot of the food that is offered, because that's what Krishna wants, didn't even exist in India until the Europeans came there. Things like chili and potatoes and tomatoes and so on, which actually come from South America and Mesoamerica, Mexico. So again, food, it has to be in the mode of goodness. So if you have the sattva guna, that's what Krishna teaches. Krishna doesn't teach in the Bhagavad Gita, offer me Indian preparations. He says food in the mode of goodness. So therefore, I don't think that will lead to chaos, because look, I mean, doesn't it seem to you that there's something wrong with the Hare Krishna movement if what unites us is just that we wear Indian clothes? Shouldn't we be united by our devotion to Prabhupada, our devotion to Krishna, our determination to give Krishna to other people? Should we really be united by wearing some kind of Indian dress? No. I mean, what I find is that, for example, my own disciples or other people I work with, even though we don't wear Indian clothes and most of us don't eat a lot of Indian prasadam, but there's an incredible solidarity. There's a wonderful love and trust and devotion among the devotees. It's a powerful community. And we're completely united. Everyone is completely devoted to Prabhupada's mission. And it's not based on wearing exotic clothes. It's just based on Krishna consciousness. So I think in my view, to say that our unity is based on like Indian recipes or Indian clothes, a lot of which are not even Hindu. The kurta, for example, is a Muslim shirt. So, I mean, should our unity really be based on wearing like Muslim clothes and some Hindu clothes? So again, in the real world, this fear that if we are not all Indianized, that we won't be united, we won't have solidarity. It's just not true. It's just, I mean, for some people, it may be important. So let them be happy and serve Krishna as they like. And that's wonderful. But there are thousands and thousands of devotees in the world who are unified on the principle of their devotion to Prabhupada and Krishna and their determination to spread this movement.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Looks like I have over estimated the number of questions we had because I mistook messages from Brahmatirtha Prabhu and Bhakti Vijñāna Maharaj for questions, and I didn't have time to check while interpreting. So I don't see any other questions for now, unless Brahmatirtha Prabhu would like to add anything from his side, or Bhakti Vijñāna Maharaj, as two other senior most devotees present.
I defer to Bhakti Vijñāna Swami.
Bhakti Vijñāna Maharaj.
Yeah. And I say that just so his picture would pop right up so I could see his smiling face, which gives me great comfort.
I just want to thank Hridayananda Maharaj for his presentation, for his passionate, as usually, presentation. And I think it was important for Russian leaders to, to get acquainted with these ideas. There is a lot of food for thought in what you said. And definitely we are very much in agreement with you that the main point which we should keep intact is this missionary spirit or preaching spirit, which was very prominent during Prabhupada's time, and which unfortunately kind of dissipates over the time. So for us, this is the most important, at least for me, it was the most important point, to keep this missionary spirit, the spirit of the spreading the Krishna consciousness movement all over the world in focus. That's definitely an essential point. And I'm grateful to you for reminding this to us. And Yanatena Prakarena Manah Krishna Niveshayet, definitely it's a very important principle as well. We should always remember by which means we can keep our mind absorbed in Krishna. And whatever way works is fine. I do have some other more subtle points for discussion, but I'll keep it for our personal meeting if Krishna allows it to happen. I think if that's it, we should finish this session, and we are waiting, looking forward for the next one.
Thank you. Maybe if I can just make a final statement, just
Yes.
very quickly, that first of all, I want to thank you, and who I consider a very dear friend, and I really do sincerely consider you to be a great Vaishnava. And I would like to thank you also for the honor of speaking to so many Russian leaders. I am sort of a student of history, and I consider Russia to be a very important country. And in many ways, it's a very important country. And the Hare Krishna movement, ISKCON in Russia, it's a very important part of the Hare Krishna movement. And so for me, it's I feel it's a very happy opportunity and honor to be able to speak to Russian leaders. And I think there's so many excellent devotees in Russia, and I know you're doing so much for Prabhupada. And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful to you for the service you're doing for Prabhupada, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak with you.
Yes, and one more concluding point is that the next session, as far as I remember, is about the historical period, very critical period in ISKCON's history, immediately after the departure of Srila Prabhupada, when there were a lot of dramatic events took place. So you, as not as a witness, but as a, one of the main figures of this period, we are very much looking forward to hear your perspective of what happened in this period, how it was happening. Your presentation doesn't need to be polemical. I would prefer you to speak in a dispassionate way as a historian of a religion, but also as an eyewitness of all these dramatic events. And your analysis, what is the main point, what are the lessons of this period, and what we should remember by assimilating all these lessons and trying to go forward. So I think that would be very, very important and elucidating presentation. We are looking forward. And again, doesn't have to be polemical.
And if I could make a last comment. First, I definitely want to thank Madame Mohan for the difficult job of translating for us who start speaking slowly and then build up too fast for any translator to follow.
Oh yeah, thanks. I'm sorry. I apologize. I didn't thank Madan Mohan, but I should.
Yes.
So I just do want to thank you, Madan Mohan, for your for all the important things you've done here.
And the Russian devotees can appreciate Madame Mohan. I've been reading some of his works recently, and you have among you a wonderful scholar who is competent and cool-headed and extremely thorough. We've had some discussion, so I've been quite impressed by that. So among you, you have it. Among you, you have Bhakti Vijñāna Swami, who I could embarrass him, so I will. He has, he's a scientist, a real honest to goodness scientist who thinks like one. And you heard in the debate on clothing, how he tries to look at it scientifically and understand what works, what doesn't. And also, his name is almost the perfect name, Bhakti Vijñāna, because he has devotion and realization. And that's from my experiences with him. We had the pleasure of being together for a week a few years back. I realized the Russian yatras in great hands. Now, in the discussion we had today, for those senior devotees, that's, you've witnessed what you're used to. For the more junior devotees, you're getting to see what is called unity in diversity. The unity is we're all Prabhupada men and women, we're all ISKCON men and women, we're all loyal to, as Hridayanand Raj said, to the basic principles, to ISKCON, to the Siddhanta. We're all loyal to that, yet we have differences of opinion on the details. We have different ways to look at it. And what's done in Russia is when I'm in India, when I give class, I must wear a dhoti. Otherwise, people will think it's strange. When I'm in other places, at our BI headquarters in a particular neighborhood, it doesn't work very well that way at all. So we have a unity in diversity. And for those who experience the diversity, and I see it in the questions here, as a problem, I suggest to you the diversity is in fact wonderful, because we're all persons. There's a, Ram Baru came up with this beautiful slogan called radical personalism. And we don't want to become impersonal. We're different persons with different tastes. Somebody likes pakoras, somebody likes pizza, and somebody likes borscht. And so for our society to succeed, we must be able to work with unity and diversity. And what I witnessed today, I'm so happy to see, is that theme of unity and diversity working so well as we consider issues from different points of view. Prabhupada gave me one very, very important instruction among many, but one very important, and I take it to heart. He said, try to ask questions from different points of view. He would always say to me, I saw him, keep asking questions, try to see things from this side and that side. In other words, look at things intelligently and philosophically. So today we had a chance to do so, and it was so much more powerful because there was some difference of opinion, which made today's presentation for me much more exciting and interesting. So I thank you all very much. I say, to paraphrase James Bond, to Russia with love, and we'll see you next week.
Russia, from Russia.
Okay. So thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Thank
Let us
you.
all thank Bhakti, Hridana Maharaj and Brahmatirtha Prabhu for their wonderful participation. Thank you very much. Very fortunate to have you and your precious time spent on discussing such important topics with us. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hridana Das Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Shanam Brahmatirtha Prabhu ki jai. Gaura Premanand.
Go.
Haribol.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.